Welcome to the Lend Academy podcast, episode number 194. This is your host, Peter Renton, founder of Lend Academy and co-founder of the LendIt Fintech Conference. Today's episode is sponsored by LendIt Fintech USA 2019, the world's leading event in financial services innovation. It's going to be happening April 8th through 9th at Moscone West in San Francisco. We're going to be covering digital banking, blockchain, financial health, and of course, online lending, as well as other areas of fintech. There will be over 5,000 attendees, over 250 sponsors, and registration is now open. Just go to lendit.com to register. We're doing something a little bit different on the show today. This is the annual LendIt Fintech USA preview show. I'm bringing on my colleagues, Todd Anderson and Ryan Lichtenwald. These are the people who also bring you LendIt News. The three of us are focusing on producing the agenda for LendIt. We also all write news articles and features on lendacademy.com. But today we are talking all about LendIt. Well, we're going to firstly start with the trends in the industry and then go through how to get the most out of the show, what are some of the features of the show. So if you're coming to LendIt, this will make your experience much more efficient by getting a good flavor for the show to help you navigate what is really a whirlwind couple of days. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome back to the podcast, Todd and Ryan.
Thanks for having us, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.
Okay, of course. So this is our LendIt preview episode. But before we get right into the nitty-gritty of the event, I wanted to take a step back and maybe talk about what are some of the trends that we're seeing in the broader fintech space today. Maybe I'll start off with you, Todd. What are you seeing?
Thanks, Peter. I think overall, I'd say the biggest trend has to do with the banking market in a couple of different areas. So I think first, when you look at bank partnerships, thinking of just a few short years ago, there was a lot of talk amongst banks and fintechs as if they were competitors with one another. And I think that's really been the biggest shift is now you talk to banks and fintechs and both see each other as partners. And so I think that shift that's happened in the last couple of years has really changed the market. So you're seeing bank partnership deals for lending, bank partnership deals for investing, bank partnership deals for other areas in fintech, for AI and conversational bots, or potentially fraud-related technologies to help catch anti-money laundering or have to comply with the Bank Secrecy Act. So I think overall bank partnerships have really shifted into this place where it's a bigger, better, safer environment where banks and fintechs are really playing with each other, pretty much consistently. And there's a lot less talk about animosity. The one area, though, where there's still, I'd say, a bit of competition moving to that second big area of banking is the growth of these digital banks. First, you've seen a big growth in some of the firms in Europe, like Oak North, who just raised a significant round, hundreds of millions of dollars. You have Monzo, N26, who's soon going to be launching in the U.S., as well as Revolut, who's launched internationally and is looking at the U.S. And so I think where there's still that competitive juices flowing is probably more in digital banking. So the fintechs that are trying to become banks or alternative to banks with either cross-border payments that are very cheap or checking and current accounts, as many people are calling them these days. And so I think those offerings put a little of that competitive edge still in it. But I think when you look at banking overall, the market's really shifted in the last couple of years to see a lot more collaboration and a lot more deals getting done between banks and fintechs than you might have seen a few years ago. And then one more area I'd say is blockchain. While there's been a lot of talk of the crypto space, especially going from where it was in the end of 2017 to where it is now, I think the big thing you've seen recently is that financial firms are really starting to put some of these projects into production. Firms like Fidelity are coming up with custody solutions. So I think you're really starting to see banks in particular big multinational banks, look at blockchain solutions so they can see how they can save money and also deal with many of the different parties, such as the supply chain finance or in syndicated lending, that it's easier to handle those types of transactions when you're on the blockchain. Right. So I think you're seeing a few different trends. And so I think it's been an interesting, I'd say, 18 months. And those are just some of the things that I've seen.
Right. Okay, so then what about you, Ryan? What are you seeing? What sticks out for you these days?
I think the number one thing to me is just the amount of capital coming into fintech. So coming into 2019, everyone was reflecting on 2018, and it ended up being the largest year for fintech funding. And so coming into 2019, we're just a few months in here now, but us collectively as a team have noticed all of these fintech funding rounds, massive funding rounds. And I think that's one of the big trends today. And, we created this post and decided to start tracking some of these large funding rounds. And I was just looking back and we're just focused on rounds that are $10 million plus globally. And I was just looking at our list and as we're recording this on March 28th, we almost have 50 firms that have raised over 10 million, many names that folks are familiar with. So some of these are large rounds for, I guess you would call them later stage fintechs. Still some new names in there. So for me, that's the number one trend that I've been seeing.
Right. And it is fascinating to see, and particularly in the digital banking space that Todd was talking about. I mean, some of the rounds are monstrously large. And it almost feels to me like if you go back to early 2015 in the lending space, where there was just capital being thrown around, I wouldn't say willy-nilly, but it was if you had a half decent idea and a half decent team, you got money thrown at you. And I don't know if it's quite the same, but boy, in the digital banking space, we are really there's so much capital that's being attracted because I think there's plenty of good companies in the US, in Europe, and all over the place actually that are attracting decent amounts of capital. And I don't want to neglect the lending space because I feel like the lending space is no longer the flavor of the month. It hasn't been so for some time. But there's still good companies are still attracting capital, and there's plenty of innovation that's happening. I think you really are seeing, particularly on the underwriting side and the fraud detection, and there's a lot happening in the lending space when it comes to bringing a better user experience to the customers. You've got companies that are now adding multiple products into their offerings, and we're certainly seeing some interesting innovations happening there as well. So anyway, let's talk about the event and itself. We're recording this 11 days before we kick it off, and maybe Todd, I can start with you, and just tell us a little bit about sort of the structure of the event and what people can expect.
Sure. So what you'll see this year at the Moscone West Center in San Francisco is the event for the majority takes place on levels 1 and level 2. So if you look at level 1, you have the expo floor. On the expo floor, you'll have food and beverage. You'll have all of our sponsors who, without them, we obviously could not do this event. And so the expo floor is where a lot of the commotion will be going on, a lot of meetings. You'll have the Brella networking area. You'll have food and beverage. So the first floor will be very, very exciting and a lot happening during the course of the event. When you look at the second floor, that's what we call the content floor. On the second floor, we'll have our keynote hall, as well as our 6 simultaneous tracks that will occur after the keynote hall. And we'll also have some private lunch areas. But really, the second level, you're looking at it, and it's all content. The third level, which we still have part of this year, is really focused on some private parties, some meeting rooms. But really, when you're coming to the event, you're looking at levels 1 and level 2. That's where the event's going to be happening this year. So Expo Hall level 1, content level 2. Moving on to the award show, which is something that we're going to have for the third year in a row. And the award show is going to be on the night of April 9th. And this is our third annual LendIt Fintech Awards. It's going to be taking place at the Julia Morgan Ballroom. And this is also in San Francisco. The award show brings together over 400 fintech influencers and innovators, and they're celebrating more than 20 awards of the biggest names in fintech. So this year we'll be, very excited to have the award show again. And so when coming to the event, think Expo Hall, content, and award show are three of the most important things to know when coming to LendIt Fintech USA.
And unfortunately, the awards are sold out. So if you're listening to this and you haven't got a ticket, I'm sorry. You can find out what happened after the event. Okay, so let's move on to some of the other things that we have going on. Ryan, why don't you tell us about some of the things that you're focusing on?
Sure, happy to. So if you've already been to LendIt before, you're familiar with our on-floor theater in the middle of the expo hall. This is the innovation zone, and there's a few types of content taking place here right in the middle of the expo floor, kind of all around all the sponsors, all of the networking. So we'll have a few different companies presenting company demos. These are short 10-minute demos that will take place on day one for companies to really showcase all of the things that they're working on, some interesting innovations, etc. Moving into the afternoons on both days, we're actually going to feature some podcasts, including the Lend Academy podcast. So you can listen to Peter record a couple of shows live. We'll also have the Rebank podcast, as well as the Wharton FinTech podcast, which I'm really excited to have them. And taking place on day two, we will have our annual Pitch It competition. So this is where startups compete, and we'll have VCs judging them. And so excited to see what happens there on our Pitch It at LendIt stage. Moving on to our more of the networking side of things. So last year we had 2 mobile apps. This year we are moving to just one to avoid some confusion and kind of streamline the networking process at LendIt. So everyone who is attending should download Brella. Within Brella, you'll get a join code that will have been emailed to you. You can join Brella, and this basically will give you all of the information that you need to about the event. So this includes the agenda and more importantly, our one-to-one meeting tool. And so you can view all of the attendees and what types of folks you might want to be meeting with, and set up short meetings with them right on the expo floor. There's an area dedicated to that.
Okay. And I want to highlight the Women in FinTech initiatives that we have. This is the third year we've really focused on this, and we'll have the third annual Women in FinTech luncheon sponsored by Deloitte on April 8th. And we also had new this year. We have a speed networking program. We have a Women in FinTech mentoring program, and also culminates in the FinTech Woman of the Year, which will be announced at the awards show on the evening of April 9th, as mentioned. I do want to just reemphasize the expo hall. We have over 200 exhibitors down there, and I highly recommend everybody spend a little bit of time down there. We've got some of the leading companies in the industry providing all kinds of different services, and I think it behooves everybody to at least spend a little bit of time wandering around, getting to know what are the latest offerings in the fintech space. I often find I'm like a kid in a candy store when I'm walking through the expo hall. And of course, like we have every year, we'll also have plenty of media there. We've got there'll be some of the media that will be actually speaking on interviewing different speakers. There'll also be plenty of media there just covering the event. And if you have, I'd highly recommend you basically find out what's going on, and you should all check it out. So then let's move on to the nitty gritty here. Let's move on to the agenda itself. And, just so everybody knows, it's, Todd, Ryan, and myself put together pretty much the entire agenda, and we've all taken various different pieces. But maybe, Todd, I can start with you, and you can talk through some of the structure of the agenda.
Sure. So as we talked about before, there is content mainly on level 2, but there is a piece on level 1. So when coming to the event, the content is structured really in a couple of different ways. So first and foremost is our keynote hall. This is going to be on level 2. It's our biggest stage. This features the biggest names. And so each day, both on April 8th and April 9th, we start off with the keynote hall, and no other content goes against it. So these are the biggest names in fintech who get the stage to themselves, talk about the hottest topics, fireside chats, presentations. So this is really where the highlight of our content starts. After each keynote hall session ends in the morning, that's when we move to our tracks. So our tracks, there's 6 simultaneous rooms. It's right across the hall from the keynote hall, so you can't miss it. We put most of the content on level 2 to make it easy to transition from the keynote to the tracks. And so after the keynote hall ends in the morning, you can go ahead to the tracks. And additionally, down on the expo floor, as Ryan was talking about, we have our innovation zone. This will feature podcasts, this will feature demos, and then on day 2, it'll also feature Pitch It. So in total, when looking at the structure of the agenda, there's 8 simultaneous tracks or rooms. Keynotes, which will kick off each day, and they go first and foremost by themselves. Then we'll go to tracks and innovation zone. Then we go to lunch. Coming back from lunch, the structure stays the same. We do a keynotes by themselves and then move on to the tracks in the innovation zone. So the majority of the content starts on level 2 with the innovation zone on level 1 supplementing it. But overall, that's how the content is structured at LendIt.
Okay, great. And then, of course, we have all the different tracks we're covering. I can't remember how many topics we're covering. I don't know whether you guys remember that off the top of your head, but there's a lot of different topics. Certainly where we are strongest and where we will continue to really lead the industry is in the lending content. And we'll have a dedicated consumer lending track, small business lending track. We have a track focused just on financial inclusion. Again, we're covering policy and regulation, and a lot more. But that's part of what I've been focusing on developing personally over the last like 6 months. And then, Ryan, why don't you tell us about some of the things that you've been focusing on?
Sure. So first off, we have the paperless mortgages and real estate innovation sessions. This really focuses on both the bank partnership angle with mortgages. We're going to talk about, making, home purchases and selling easy. There's some really interesting platforms that have huge traction here. We're going to talk about bank connectivity and how that improves the mortgage process, tokenized real estate, non-bank lending, and of course, the HELOC. We also have the credit and underwriting track. Here we'll talk about some of our topics around, customer acquisition, automated loan underwriting, kind of go into depth on identity and sort of those topics, including AI, some of the benefits there, and also dig into kind of what the credit market is looking like today. And then finally, the last track that I worked on was niche lending. And here we're just covering a wide variety of verticals. So we're going to cover the gig economy. We're going to cover some of the opportunities in the Hispanic market and some of the lenders there. We're going to talk about auto finance, and we're also going to cover patient lending. So those are some of the topics that we're covering in that track.
Okay, Todd, and what have you been working on?
So to go back to some of the stuff I was mentioning in our top stories, I've really been focused on bank partnerships, digital banking, And one thing that you'll see this year, before getting into some of the specifics of the tracks I worked on, is you'll see more banks on the agenda than you've ever seen before. There'll be banks in not only the digital banking and community banks and credit union tracks, but you also see banks in our lending tracks. You'll see banks on our international track. You'll see banks on our credit tracks, our real estate tracks. So really what we've seen, the shift has been that banks are working with fintechs a lot more. And so we're covering bank partnerships on our digital banking innovation and partnership tracks. We're covering bank partnerships from a couple of different angles: how companies can launch products quickly, how there's various bank partnerships from chat to AI to lending. So we're really taking a look at how banks and fintechs are working together in a really in-depth way. For the first time this year, we're also going to be featuring a track of community banks and credit unions. The main difference between those two tracks is community banks and credit unions, they have to operate differently. They're not able to do proof of concepts that cost billions of dollars. They need to be smart. They need to be strategic. So we're covering that angle for those types of banks and credit unions that come to the show. So if you're a little bit bigger of a bank, you would go to the digital banking innovation and partnership tracks. If you're on the smaller scale, or if you're a credit union, you would go to the community banking credit union track. So we're really trying to specify different types of content for the different attendees that join us. We'll also be covering blockchain as we have the last few years. We put a little bit of a different spin on it this year. We're really focused on blockchain for financial services. So what we like to call enterprise blockchain, talking about payments, talking about supply chain. Is blockchain really ready to move to production in terms of scale in financial services? We'll be talking about Providence's blockchain from Figure Technologies. And so we're really looking at blockchain from the enterprise side. And then last but not least, of course, is the international track, where we cover different markets around the world: Latin America, the Middle East, China. So we really want to hit on various different areas of the world. And that's something that's always been core to LendIt, is that this is our global event.
Right. And I also do want to mention a couple other topics that we will be covering. We're doing, where there's been a bit of a merging of the sort of payment space and the lending space, with payments providers going to the lending space, lending providers going into the payment space. And so we are going to be covering some payments innovation. And of course, as we do every year, there is, we have an investing track which is focused on all the investors in the space, whether you're a VC investor or a debt investor, hedge fund, what have you. We've got a whole range of different topics focused just on that audience. Anyway, I want to move on and talk about keynotes, because that's obviously where we've got some really big names on the stage this year, many new names to LendIt, and wanted to just talk about that briefly. Maybe Todd, start with you and talk about who are the keynotes that you're most interested in this year.
Sure. There were a few that really caught my eye. I'd say first is having Sally Krawcheck join us this year. Sally's obviously a well-known in the banking community. She's also started her firm Elvest, and she's going to be talking about how financial services firms, banks or fintechs, are really missing out on a potential opportunity of not targeting women investors. There's, by some estimates, over $700 billion on the sidelines that could be put into different parts of the financial system if financial firms were just more targeted towards products that would be speaking to women investors. So she's going to be talking about that, which I think will be a fascinating discussion, as well as Green Dot and Stash. This is the first year that we have Green Dot on the agenda. The partnership between them and Stash is very interesting. They just recently released more information about the partnership. So I think what you'll see is that the keynote stage features some innovation in a variety of different ways. And those are just two of the many keynotes that really stood out to me.
Ryan, what about you? What stood out for you?
Yeah, so I'm really excited to hear from Bo Hartman, who's the head of consumer technology and a co-CIO at Goldman Sachs Bank. So my perspective is Marcus has really moved from kind of being a new entrant to being kind of one of the leaders in consumer finance. So very interested to hear what they have to say and some of the things that they're working on. And then secondly, I would have to say Mike Cagney from Figure. I think, getting beyond all the capital that they raised, this is a company that is still relatively new, but is originating all of their home equity lines of credit on the blockchain. And they've done so at incredible speed. And it's just really impressive to me that, they've gone from idea to execution to, I've already received a mailer from them, which is kind of funny. But yeah, I just think it's going to be very interesting to hear what Mike has to say. And, they're really differentiated from a lot of other players in the space.
Right, for sure. Well, yeah, there's so many great ones here. I have to I want to give a plug to our opening keynote, which is we have the CEO of Discover, Roger Hochschild, and Douglas Merrill from CEO of Zest Finance. I think this has been a really important partnership that was announced just a couple of weeks ago, and we'll have them on stage together talking about how a pretty significant bank is using machine learning to really totally revamp how they're sort of expanding their credit box. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see, hear what they talk about. Of course, we have some of the lending, all the lending leaders. We got Max Levchin from Affirm, Rob Frowine from Cabbage, Renaud Laplanche from Upgrade, all giving keynotes. We have Karen Mills talking about small business lending. In fact, she just written a book. I'll be interviewing her on stage, and she obviously was a guest on the podcast just pretty recently. We've got FICO and Experian on stage together for the first time at LendIt, talking about consumer permission data. And we've got Yihan Feng from Yirindai, who's I'm fascinated to hear what she has to say. There's a lot going on in China right now, and it's I'll be interested to hear her thoughts about what's going on there. And yeah, I think it's going to be. I'm really excited about our keynote program. I think we've got a fantastic lineup, and I'm just as excited as anybody else to hear what they all have to say. So we're just about running out of time here, but before we sign off, let's talk about something that I think most people come to these events to do, and that is to network. And I think we really, it is extremely important. And maybe Ryan, you can tell us a little bit about, how people can network. How can people get the most out of the event when it comes to networking?
Yeah. So if you haven't already and you're coming to LendIt, I highly recommend you get out your phone right now and go to the App Store and download Brella. As I mentioned earlier, that's our app for one-on-one meetings. And it is sponsored by Marqeta this year. And so what they've done is they've created this very simplistic way of scheduling one-on-one meetings with folks who have joined Brella. And so you can schedule it with your calendar and just set up these short little meetings, which tend to be great. And the way this works then is you're assigned a table, and there's an area of our expo floor that has numbers on them. So you know where to meet. It makes the networking process extremely easy and efficient, so you can kind of get the most out of networking at LendIt. So highly recommend that. In addition, I will also just mention that on our website, we also have our company list and attendee list. So you can always view that to see some of the folks that are attending. And then moving on to some of our networking events. So we have our Art of Innovation Happy Hour that's taking place on April 8th at the end of the first day. We also have our wine tour, which unfortunately now is sold out, but that's a first time doing that this year. So kind of interested to hear how that works and some of the, more unique opportunities. And then of course, we also have outside parties that are organized by, other sponsors or companies that are kind of having an event outside of LendIt to draw on kind of all the folks coming to LendIt FinTech.
Okay, well, we're pretty much out of time, so maybe let's start off. We've been working very hard for the last several months, and let's just finish off by sharing what are you guys planning on doing right after LendIt?
I would say I probably would sleep a little bit, but overall, I do have a 5-month-old, so I will be spending plenty of time with him. And then if the weather gets nice, maybe I'll begin to play some golf. I know I'll be watching the Masters since it's the week after LendIt, or I guess the end of the week that LendIt happens. So those are just a couple of the things I'll be doing once we finish.
Yes, that has been great news. For the last 2 years, I haven't been able to watch much of the Masters because it's been on the weekend, like right at the weekend before that LendIt, and we've been working so hard. So I'm very much looking forward to sitting down and watching the Masters as well. Anyway, Ryan, what about you? What are you up to?
Yeah, so I'm actually coming back for a few days back to Wisconsin, and then we head out to Puerto Rico to seek the warmer climate and kind of relax after LendIt. So that's our plan.
Good for you. Well, I'm actually staying in the Bay Area. I'm heading down to Half Moon Bay. My wife is coming out, and I will be closing my laptop and sort of enjoying all the natural beauty of that part of the world. Anyway, so I think it's going to be a fantastic show. This is our 7th annual, and I think it's going to be the best one we've ever had. So really want to thank you guys for coming on and giving everybody some help with the LendIt preview show. Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks, Peter.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Okay, see ya. Well, there you have it. I hope to see many Lend Academy podcast listeners at the show. If you do listen to the show, please come up and say hi. I'd love to have a quick chat. And if you are still on the fence, time is running out, but if you are still on the fence as you're listening to this, tickets will be available right up to the morning of April 8th. So you will be able to buy tickets at the door. And I hope to see many of you in San Francisco. We'll be off next week. I'm taking the week off. There will be no podcast next week. We'll be back in 2 weeks. And hope you have a great show. Thanks. Bye. Today's episode was sponsored by LendIt Fintech USA 2019, the world's leading event in financial services innovation. It's happening April 8th through 9th at Moscone West in San Francisco. It's going to be the largest fintech event held in the Bay Area in 2019. We'll be covering online lending, blockchain, digital banking, and much more. You can find out all about it and register at lendit.com.